because the project that I'm going to do is like very different than what I normally do. There's not going to be any sensory motor stuff, right? And even within the field of technology, what I typically work on is more sort of personalization and agency in digitized spaces. But today, given the invitation and the topic of the conference, I'm allowing myself some crazy speculative, frivolous stuff, and there's going to be very little empirical facts going forward from here. And I'm kind of hoping, so it sounds like we have maybe a little bit longer for discussion, that this will be sort of an invitation for all of us, not just to think about like sort of which singular jobs will, you know, disappear and which will emerge, but more about what kind of world is it that we will be working in. And you can think of this talk as a sort of, you know, the first sort of attempt at like throwing out some possibilities, and then I would be very eager to hear all the things that I did not manage to fit into this vision, and all the ways in which we should maybe think of alternative visions, as I am not a techno-determinist, right? So there will be many possible futures. Okay, so basically the talk is going to be about E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops. How many of you have read it? Oh, there's so many that haven't read it. Okay, so this is actually very, very challenging and also interesting. Okay, so I will start by telling you, some world building about that story, so even if you haven't read it, you will be fine. Then I will talk a little bit about what actually productivity, what kind of productivity is envisioned in that world, and then turn to our world and talk about some of the differences also between the sort of world we see in The Machine Stops and our more platform-based technology society, and then look a little bit ahead towards the end. So that's the plan. So starting with this fantastic little short story from 1909. I'm just like continuously so flabbergasted that he wrote this so early. So basically the scenario that you meet in this story is that you are envisioning a world in which somehow the air outside has become unbreathable, and humans have built this giant machine apparatus, right? That where people basically live in these little beehive-like rooms in large clusters, and basically the machine provides everything for them in this room, so there's very little need to ever leave, right? So it's a world that is described as one of instant gratification. So Forster describes how people get irritable if things doesn't immediately happen. It is, however, as we look forward to, a standardized immediate gratification, right? So it's not personalized. The beds are the same size for everybody, like our main character complains about, right? Politically, which perhaps fits the standardization, it looks like a sort of communist technology, right? Where you have, we're told that there's a central committee, or at least there were, right? So you have that sort of guides or steers the machine society politically. We see, and this is of course before Brave New World, right? But we see something very similar in terms of like reproduction, that there's these kind of nurseries, right, where everybody has one book that sort of guides them to the machine processes that they also sort of reveal like a religious item. And in the book it says that parental duties end at birth, right? So there's a bit of humans needed in the process, but basically no familial ties necessary. In terms of like sort of information technology, Forster imagines imagines that there are these sort of optical plates that sounds fantastic, like so much like iPads, almost like where you can do this sort of video conferencing with each other, and there's like pneumatic post, which is like almost seems like, you know, a sort of wireless form of information transfer. Our main characters is Vashti, who is like a lover of the system, right? So she cherishes and sort of religiously is religiously fond, you could say, of this machine society. And you see this sort of normative way in which people are like saying there's certain things that are mechanical to do, meaning good, or unmechanical to do, meaning it doesn't fit with the machine system, right? She has a son that she somehow stayed in contact with, who is our hero of the story, I would say, who is the sort of rebel that has thoughts about the machine system and what people become. Okay, so you can ask me in the Q&A, like, or now, if there's like things that are, you know, very confusing, but that's basically the sort of the world we are invited into. Now, our question for this conference is about the future of work. So what does productivity look like in this, which arguably is the imagination of a fully automated society, right? So in this conference we talk a lot about automation, right? Why do I choose this story? Here we have, guys, right? A fully automated society, right? But this is as the story sort of takes place, that is, you can think of like as pretty much the climax of this sort of machine completion. What we are sort of told about an earlier stage in which humans built the machine, right? So when I said it's not sure that there's a central committee anymore, there certainly was a central committee, but now who knows, right? Because nobody actually has access to that, whether it is almost like a bot, or whether these humans still exist but have become irrelevant. This is all left a bit unknown. So what is the productivity as this sort of high stage of automation in the story? Well, what we're told is that Vashti is a lecturer, and she sort of seeks, they ask it in these like kind of conversations with other humans, like, oh, did you get any ideas from that? Did you get, and it seems clear that the productivity that is sort of invited or perhaps even demanded in this machine society is to get ideas, right? And frankly, I don't know about those of you that has read the story, was a little puzzled, right? So because in a way this is so fantastically visionary, it maps onto so many tendencies we see. But these lecturers, they talk about the stories of lecturers are simply so irrelevant to these people's lives, right? So our main character, Vashti, she is a specialist of some kind of like ancient Australian music, right? That she, you know, talks to others. You wonder, can these others walk away? Why are they listening? Why is it not cat videos and porn, right? Why is, what, you know, why the content, right? Why this content, right? Why these generations of ideas? How does it functionally feed back into the machine system, right? We're not told, so they have to speculate, right? So on the one hand, I was like, oh my God, is this like a failure of imagination? I mean, like, poor guy, it was 1909, I can, you know, I won't blame him. Or did he in fact try to say something with this mismatch, right? Because if you try to think, well, what could it alternatively be that would be relevant to a life in full automation, right? You know, you might still have porn and cat videos, but not much else is going to be relevant, and which is then putting a very, very, very grim light on our life of porn and cat videos. Like, do you guys see this? Because actually, if you have retracted to a life of functional uselessness, this is perhaps precisely what we have left, right? So he told us a story where there were still these lectures, but in a way absurdist, disconnected from any functionality, right? So our internet, of course, does the porn and cat videos, but it also does WikiHow, how to this, how to advance, right? How to do these are the functionality and entertainment, right? So we still have the functionality because we don't have a world of full we still have functional roles, right? Okay. So now, so what I'm suggesting is that what we should think about is whether these getting of ideas at this stage of full automation inherently are useless, even that there's hardly anything that they could be about that in a way would make sense. Now turning to Kuno, our rebel, it's unclear if he seems unemployed in the story, I must say. But he tries to gain orientation in the world, and he wants to exit to the surface of the world with his respirator, and he does. And then, so the machine in June is such that it functions, but it also has its own repair system called the mending apparatus, right? And there was also politically the committee of the mending apparatus, right? So basically you have to understand a machine that fixes itself. This machine, interestingly, both fixes the mechanics of the machine, but also the social order. So when Kuno escapes to the surface of the earth, it is the mending apparatus that captures him and brings him back to the social order, right? Okay, so Kuno says, cannot all you lecturers see that it is we that are dying? That down here, the only thing that really lives is the machine. We created the machine to do our will, but we cannot make it do our will now. It has robbed us of the sense of space and of the sense of touch. It has blurred every human relation and narrowed down love to a carnal act. It has paralyzed our bodies and our wills, and now compels us to worship it. The machine develops, but not on our lines. The machine proceeds, but not to our goal. We only exist as the blood corpuscles that course through its arteries, and if it could work without us, it would let us die. Okay, so that, of course, hangs as another thing as the ending nears, and sure enough, the whole thing unravels. Are the humans being let die because they have become useless, or does the machine simply dysfunction because it actually doesn't succeed in maintaining itself as it's completely detached from human purposes and control? This we don't know, okay? But the ending, I think, is fantastically interesting, also given Jake's talk and on large language models, is that in the end, the lecturers simply generate lectures based not on the historical facts or things in the world, but based on what would have happened if it was according to the machine, which is very much ChatGPT, right? And it is a confabulation based on the facts and ideology at place that now the humans produce. So the humans have become a sort of ChatGPT in this world. And the spoiler is in the title, right? The machine stops. Okay, so sorry, you should still read it, but it was Forster that gave it away, not me. The material production and functionalities of the machine begin to decay, right? So, and what you see is that the mending apparatus is not working. It's this bureaucratic hell, right, where people are calling and complaining and nothing happens and there's a delay and it's almost like the MBTA and nothing works. And as it really starts going bad, the air that people breathe are no longer, clear. People simply sit helplessly and passively back because their only action repertoire is to ask the machine, right? So basically now all their actions are mediated. Here, this is where my sensory motor background comes in. Because all our actions go through the world, guys, right? Our bodies in the world and our purposes depend on that world. And now that world was the machine and people don't know what to do. So they simply, and they have no social fabric even outside this machine. So it's a dire end to it. Okay. So now I've gone on a long time about question is why, right? Why do I go on about this story? It's clearly not like the world we have here today. There are certain similarities, like during COVID, it certainly was, and we almost sat in these rooms, almost, like I think that probably if we do like some kind of, Google statistic, like this story probably rose fantastically in popularity as the pandemic hit. But there are clear differences, right? So, first of all, we are not in this, one central committee communist society here in America, right? And in most places, it's like, insofar as we could say we have a machine society, right? It is very different, right? It is driven by capitalist motives, and there's like conflicts of interests happening. So here in the machine stops, you really see that like it is really written as if it's organized for human purposes, like to fulfill human purposes, that there's not like a sort of conflict of interest within the machine. We have many different actors, many people have written about, the surveillance capitalism, etc. This also means on a human level that like you can play out divergences of preferences, right, in our world here. So like from a sort of individual perspective, we are situated differently in this market, and there's room for divergent, if not ideas, then preferences, right? And in terms of the technology, so we do not have one giant machine. We do not have one giant machine. So like many, I have like here pictures of like, Van Dyck and Nick Schoenecker, the platform capitalism and the platform society, like trying to theorize what does it mean to be a platform society. And if we take that metaphor, so Van Dyck is saying the term refers to a society in which social and economic traffic is increasingly channeled by an overwhelmingly corporate, global, online platform ecosystem that is driven by algorithms and fueled by data. Okay? And so the top little picture that is from her book with like these many different platforms interacting. The middle picture there's also from Van Dyck's work. Basically, this tree metaphor is supposed to suggest that you have this kind of hardware infrastructure, that's the roots. Then you have like the stem of the tree, which is like the sort of software and algorithmic control, right, of the platforms, and then you have the sort of tree branches of user interactions and data feedback. The lower diagram is from the Wikipedia article on the platform economy that basically tries to focus on this fact that like platforms are, coordinating many different actors, right? So you have, between both informations and goods, between consumers and producers being coordinated through this many-sided platform. And I think that these are very useful ways of mapping platforms and what they do and how they function. But what I want to do is to give you the slide from hell. Okay? And this is a different kind of mapping where we, with the sort of machine stops in the background, try to think of our platform society as the machine. Right? So the whole platform ecology. So instead of thinking, in the machine stops, you have this mechanical super system with tentacles, that's the mending apparatus coming out, and like, mechanical routes into each room, right? We are interfacing, right, with a platform system that both includes mechanical parts, hardware parts, software parts, but also human and material parts of these tentacles, right? So in our system, it is not fully automated, right? But you could argue, which is also what a lot of the sort of platform literature argues, is that the platform ecology touches massive aspects of our not just economy, but lives, right? And that the tendency is to continuously increase and like intensify and venture into new areas where you can harvest data, right? And create new platforms of control. Like, so if you just think back, like, which kind of activities that certainly did not seem to involve somebody, you know, with an iPad connecting to a system of operation, now do just in the last 5 years. Like that, like flow forward is quite powerful. So this slide is supposed to symbolize the following. So like we have all these octopuses, whatever, that has tentacles that are maybe if you could think of as separate platform systems, right? And inside those platform systems you have workers, right? So that basically, so if I would say like for Amazon to work as a platform, it needs to have the delivery driver. So this is like a person that works inside Amazon as a machine system as much as the programmer. You guys see this? So the programmer, of course, also works inside that system, but we often would say that the driver, because they're interfacing with, like, so on the tree model, like that we have before, the driver would not be inside the system, but would be a user. You guys see this? But here, so my suggestion is, maybe another slide from now, is that we can in a sense split up, so along the columns is the work that pertains to the front end user interface, right? The work that pertains more to the infrastructure of the machine system, running the platform society and the machine's active, but also the support service, transport, and the tentacles, right? So here the delivery driver would be included, right? And the data workers that label entries and the content moderates, etc. Right? And then you have the content producers in the third column, right? So that would be both digital content producers, influencers, etc., but also people that produces the goods that are sold on these platforms, right? So it's both digital production and material production. And then my last column here is this questionable issue of governance, that there could also be jobs in the platform society that pertains to actually governing the platforms, okay? So to just jump back here, here you see some images of people that are producing, right? For the platform ecology, you have people working inside, right? And the little governance is supposed to be, you know, up there, perhaps, okay? But the idea is that, like, more and more is of our sort of world and jobs are in a way within these platform ecologies, and very little is outside. And the blue arrows is supposed to sort of suggest that more and more is pulled in, right? So because the sort of sensor, you know, the logic of getting more and more data, as I described very well by Sushana Zuboff, for example, right? The sort of logic and imperative of expansion and growth pulls more and more into this kind of stuff. Okay, so now looking at this chart. So I told you sort of what I'm thinking, like here, then now we can think sort of spatially, where are the jobs? Where are the jobs within the platform society? Then we can also say, as the worker, where do I do my job? So on the left side, you see, like, either I can go to work, right? So I could perform my work at another location than my home, right? So here we see this is not the case if the machine stops, right? Except actually there are two jobs in the machine stops that we hear about other than the lecturer. But they are told to us that they are like sort of leftovers from prior times. So one is a flight attendant, because they still have, and so the fact that they even have airships is a leftover thing, so we can sort of kind of see how these are jobs that are still there but dying, right? So this is of course a question for us: are the I go to work jobs dying, or are they still going to be with us? Then there are the jobs you can do from home, the remote work, and then I have put sort of a row of productive leisure, right? Down here. So I mean, I can go over platform as I teach, right? But I go to work, but I'm still integrated with these systems, right? You then could have in the sort of infrastructure inside the machine, so to speak, jobs. I talked already about a lot of those jobs of delivery, for example. Then on the content production, you might have content where it actually depends on you visiting the surface of the earth, right? In the machine stuff's terminology to produce your content, right? These are the crazy Instagrammers traveling to the sunflower field, right? Where everybody's at anyway. Okay. The work from home, a lot of white-collar jobs can be done on the front interface, right? Working inside the machine from home is a lot of data work, right? Labeling a lot of the sort of work making these platforms run, and also, of course, like programmers, etc. Then we have, in terms of content production, I should say in terms of the real world, content production is also very much, of course, like the manufacturing of goods happens going to work. Digital production is mostly sort of content production of entertainment and like videos, digital content, right? Productive leisure, so in the user end, of course, this is always almost any part of this is in fact a sort of behavioral data generating item next to the sort of productivity. But in the sort of productive leisure, this is like also, of course, like the targeting place for advertisement and behavioral manipulation. I put like, there could be some work inside the machine that's productive leisure. Like, for example, wiki editors was like, you can help me fill out that you're sort of working on these systems, but for leisure. And of course, you could do video making, it's our content production for leisure, also not for game. You could swap, you could do communities help. There's a lot of these sort of kind of sharing, not-for-profit sharing economy aspects that sort of happens in that quadrant. Okay. In terms of the governance, you could of course have jobs regulating, governing, policing, etc. These systems, but you can also have democratic processes, citizen activism, etc. in terms of governance. Okay, so far so good. More slides from here. So now, like, now looking forward, right? So this was like sort of my attempt at mapping the present. Okay. So now, looking a little bit more forward. I think we can label this new machine society like with the sort of human cogs inside it a little bit like a cyborg machine, right? Because you have the sort of organic part of the machine system. And currently, it is heavily dependent on jobs, human jobs. And we saw in many of the other talks in this weekend that actually, there is currently, a lot of need for workers, right? So that on the one hand, we're getting these two images, right? One of this sort of, apocalypse where like all jobs are gone, and on the other hand, currently, these crazy needs for human labor, right? How is this? Right? When we think of the machine society in this way, it actually makes total sense. Right? Because as the machine society is building itself, it's being built and expanding, you need a tremendous amount of human labor. Currently, so much of our sort of AI functioning depends on various forms of data work. For example, I'll say a little bit more about that later, but just in terms of like the epistemic access, and sort of like a lot of speakers have talked about like the sort of hyper-taylorism of like these sort of breakdown of tasks, right? Where people working inside the machine are often given very little epistemic access to the larger processes that they are part of. The platform logic, I think I've talked about already, is like this Well, so one thing is that we can almost clearly see that some of these cogs inside of the machine can be replaced with automated machine aspects, right? So the human can be plugged out and a sort of a machine automated aspect can be plugged in. But also we can also see a lot of new jobs appearing as these platforms are expanding and creating new levels of integration, etc. But what does that leave us in terms of the overall picture? Like, how do we even think of the purpose of work, right? In this sort of road of machine expansion. How do we think of governance? Like there were some concerns this morning, right, about how our political systems will be able to, like they've been at this point incredibly ineffectuous, and we can only imagine them being less effective in the future given current tendencies. Like what in the current world suggests to us that they're not going to be more captive as we move forward. Will they sort of dwindle away like the committee in the machine stops, right? And what can we expect of the quality of life? In the machine stops, we saw that this sort of full automation created some kind of dissolution of the system, right? What are we expecting here? Like there's been very interesting voices writing, I think, like Gibman and Dr. Roth talks about the inshitification of platforms, right? This sort of deterioration as soon as, because basically they use this drug dealer approach, right? Where you get like, you know, things for free and then you get trapped, and then and then when you have path dependence, you know, things get worse, right? And this is a pattern that we see already as a sort of structural aspect. Then we have like Goodhart's law, right? That when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure, or Campbell's law very similarly, right? Like every time you make something like the grounds of a social decision making, right? You corrupt that indicator, right? All this suggests that these machines will function less well in terms of their functionality going forward if there is not some kind of attempt like to anchor it in the world, right? Okay, so now I add to like all these red things. It's like, okay, where is that automation predicted, right? Like most of these areas, there are some of these jobs where we predict some automation. Like given current sense, given what people are saying, that we expect some robotics on that first line, right? Work going to work, that's more robotics. The second line is more about bots, right? And sort of automated software processes, etc. In content creation, of course, generative AI is going to be capable of writing books and etc., doing nice things, right? In terms of our productive leisure, this is of course where people have discussed whether we should get paid for our data, right? And our behavioral data. Currently, these things are not paid. But I also want us to think about which kind of actions will in fact be thought of as unmechanical and thus not allowed in this future society. Are you blocking the system? Are you not blocking the system? I'll say a little bit more about that here as I conclude. So, I wanted to sort of draw a little bit attention to some examples from self-driving cars and data work here. So, sorry. I don't know if you read, but recently these cruise self-driving cars that were rolled out in San Francisco and in many other cities here in August and September. They were taken off the streets in San Francisco after an accident. And I think that these kinds of fights, I personally expect them to be back on the street quite soon, but we clearly see these sort of clashes of whose streets, whose values, right? Many people were quite angry, right, that these self-driving cars had been rolled out into the street environment without more precaution, you could say. And some people are trying to game it, right? So have you seen these people putting combs on the self-driving cars and trying, and then they don't know what to do and stop, and etc. Here you have a traffic jam of cruise cars. But basically when I say what will be deemed unmechanical, I really am worried that a lot of currently legal human actions will be illegal if our environment is primarily for automation, right? So as we have increased automation, I fear that it is no longer our streets, in the sense that the purposes of the machine are valued more than human freedom, and thus it will be illegal to troll the cruise cars, right? And because the accidents are due to humans being human and not actually to the cars. And this cruise example was very clear that there was actually a human hit and run driver that had hit a person that then flew over on the cruise car, right? So if you just get those humans off the road, right, the machines work well, right? So this question of whose world is it? And then, of course, also in terms of the environmental, the cost of these machines. So we are sold on the transformation towards a machine society, both in terms of our needs being met in a very wonderful and smooth way, as we see also in the machine starts, but also because we're told it's cheaper, right? And there, of course, there's increasing attention to the environmental cost of these data centers and this data-heavy society. It is simply costing a lot of energy to run these systems, and if we project this continued growth, we will look at some really, really significant environmental cost of running these systems. But I also want to point to the sort of exploitative labor under the hood. So there was many stories out in terms of ChatGPT, for example, how data workers in Kenya were used to label and do data entry for ChatGPT for $2 an hour, right? So what makes it cheaper, right? The fact that you can do it automatically? No. It's a machine logic that includes human labor at a lower cost, and that the cost efficiency would also have happened if you could just exploit human beings in another place. You would also have lowered cost, right? So a lot of these technologies, they hide exploitative human labor costs. So a lot of these researchers have worked on this human labor under the hood, right, or inside the machine for the purpose of this talk. So just to end, what I would like us to think about is when we think about the future of jobs, that we could think about it more in the context of the overall direction of society and the sustainability of these paths. Is this job a job that fits into this sort of technopoly, right? Or is this job a tool, right, that in a sense respects human values and human agency, right? And most of all these things are network effects and path dependence and very difficult to get out of, right? So we have to be very careful to not step into a dependency with a short-term gain, right, and a long-term cost, right? In Denmark, we say that some actions are like peeing in your pants to get more. And so I want to leave you with that, let's not do that.
You're welcome to stay up there if you want. good that you did this in person, but sorry to anyone who watches the video of this who's inside of the machine watching a lecture, just talk to them while they sit in a chair, you know? So, okay, so any questions? Yes.
Thanks so much. This was a tremendously interesting talk, and it's inspired me. I'm teaching in course next semester in Science and Cultural History. I might try to work this Forster novella into this out. One thing that I was wondering about, and or perhaps worried about, is the risk of this analogy or this allegory is sort of drawing attention and emphasizing the sort of human versus technology antagonism at the expense of intra-human class hierarchy and conflict. And I've been thinking historically from Forster's novels, in part a kind of humanist response to the socialist H.G. Wells Time Machine, which presents a dystopia in very stark class. There's no real technological problem, but just you have a leisure class and a servant class, and this is the nature of the dystopia. So, Wells was unpleasant and eugenicist and generally nasty in all kinds of ways. That being said, I think there's something thinking in the context of today's platform capitalism. Is there a risk of obscuring the fact that there's a small group of people who own the octopus and are profiting from it and are maybe less subjected to it?
No, can I just answer immediately? Yeah. So now there's nobody else I don't have to wait. And just keep the question in mind, right? Everybody else that's talked earlier, it's very challenging. But so thank you so much for this. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I hate all these kind of the us versus the technology question, but the part where I say it's different than the machine stuff because we have capitalism, multiple interest, or conflict of interest that's not in the story. If I had longer, right? But I do think that there is a way in which a lot of these agencies precisely are hidden through the machine. So for example, with this data work, etc., what we are presented with on the user end is, look, it's being automated by this machine that does it, and all the humans are hidden. And there's also this way of hiding, of course, the owners, etc., right? Just calling it a platform suggests a stability, like an object, right? It precisely hides the agency and the optimization of interest built into that dynamic process. So I couldn't agree more. And I actually I think that you're right. It is dangerous to try to suggest that it's the machine that's the problem. So I don't think it's the machine that's the problem, but the problem is when you have machine logic serving human interests that are sort of capturing more and more you could say space and culture. Or I've been you could Neil Postman already in Technopoly talks about this kind of culture captured by technology. Of course, it is humans that are guiding, producing, etc. But the capture nonetheless, right? Yeah.
Actually, I don't think that the machine of the story should be taken literally. I think it's a social as well as a technological, and it reminds me of heavy metal group Rage Against the Machine. It's a revolutionary socialist group that just this year was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You should put the Rage Against the Machine into the PowerPoint. But I also see some gender themes in the story, and I think they're a little bit disquieting. Vashti's the woman who's satisfied and trying to control her son, who's creative and adventurous, and also all the invisible work of the machine, which includes invisible childbearing, invisible housework. I mean, there is a sense in which this whole discourse of work as paid work treats unpaid work invisible machine, the work gets done, but we don't have to worry about it. Nobody's really working, even though it's getting done. So I think there's kind of a gender theme embedded in the story.
Yeah, I think it's as well.
Quick question on politics and then about what we might do in the future inside the machine. You suggested that our politicians were unlikely to be able to solve these questions of how we should interact, how we should control the technology. But isn't what's happened in the last week encouraging that so many politicians around the world have actually said there should be limits on what big tech can do, that big tech should no longer be able to mark its own homework. There should be some independent groups which have expertise that can actually study big tech and explore the risks that one of the most highly credentialed computer scientists in the world, Yoshua Bengio, has been put in charge of a system to study the risks of these technologies. So isn't there at least some positive news there? And in terms of what jobs will be left in the future, I do believe that the machine, the AIs, could do all the jobs. But I'd like to put on the table a proposition that whatever AI we design, that AI should ensure that we humans are still able to step in, that maybe some part of the universal basic income should be withheld unless we are showing that we can still, I don't know, kindle fire from sticks and grow food, because after all, the machine could be rendered incapable by maybe solar radiation, which has happened in the past, it can wipe it all out, and we humans would have to pick up again. So any sensible design of such a machine will have to ensure that we humans don't become laid back and useless like in the film WALL-E, but we are able to interact and step in and still drive cars and do all the other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot. So in terms of the politics, right, yes, I think that there are tendencies that are encouraging. However, what I was trying to say here is it really has to be a lot of people that want a different world for it not to go a particular way, right? And like I said, I'm not like a technological determinist. So I do think that there are ways of going about, but I am quite worried still that the tendencies we see are very small, kind of fringe changes that does not seem to get at the bigger issues. Though I do think that I was talking earlier about the AI Act in Europe. I do think there are big human terms in there that are encouraging. For example, that an AI should respect human autonomy, whatever that means. But even putting that language in there is quite interesting to me actually. And in that sense, yeah, I think that there are also encouraging trends. In terms of keeping people able to do the things that they have no purpose of doing, I'm concerned because I think we should all learn to ride horses in case the cars break down. I mean I think that's unrealistic. That every skill that now we have a tool to do, we will still be able to do. But I think that there is, in the machine stops, there's an epistemic point, right? So where he's really making the point that there's a point in which no one even understands the machine that they built. And that's another thing about the EU AI Act, is about interpretability and if we don't even understand the tools that we make, then it's become pure magic, right? So now getting from here to there is pure magic, and there's no way to get into it. And so I try to highlight that with the kind of also data work under the hood, that it's precisely constructed to create epistemic blindfolders, what called it, gamified obscurity, or what did you, where is it? what did you call it? Like the obscurity, the deceptive obscurity, right? I think it's a beautiful concept, and I think that that's really problematic when the machine, on purpose, right, creates these sort of inability to understand the systems. Because I think it's more realistic that you're going to be able to repair or interact when you have more understanding of the system.
Anyone else? Yes, here.
I really like the use of the fiction. I've also been writing a bit about what I think of as like post-scarcity fiction. And I had two thoughts when you were talking. Like, one is that, you know, a major feature of the machine in the story seems to be its ability to get people to want things that are, you know, that work with what the machine can offer. And, you know, I don't know, it made me think of this literary theorist, Frederick Jameson, who has this point about postmodernism, that it's the era in which our desires are more similar than ever before, and we come to stress our differences. Like, we're so obsessed with essentially tiny cultural customizations on top of what is essentially the most mass-produced society that's ever existed. And yeah, I don't know, I was thinking about that and about how one of the features of our society seems to clearly have to do with the fact that society is just much more efficient the more we all want the same thing, right? And insofar as like companies can convince us with advertising and other things to want the same thing, that's going to just make for a more efficient society. And it seems to already be a feature of our world that, you know, the machine we live in has this kind of characteristic. And then the other thing is like, I think there's a bunch of sci-fi books that seem to be drawing out this implication. There's also this book by the conservative novelist Michelle Houellebecq. That's like one of my favorite versions of this, called The Possibility of an Island. And in the end, humanity, it's another version of like, in the end, we all are just individuals, completely isolated, living in pods, kind of forever. And I think what I find really interesting about that version of the story is like, I do feel like, I mean, Nancy was talking about the invisibility of your care work aspect, and one thing it seems to me is that these visions of a world of instant gratification are a world where it's hard to imagine people being able to interact with other people. You know, that there's something about like, if you live in a world of instant gratification, you know, one thing that is not capable of instant gratification is like love and other people. You know, people don't always want what you want. A lot of our lives are negotiating conflicts with other people, differences in desire. And, you know, one of the things that like seems to be activated as an anxiety in these stories is that people who are so used to instant gratification would prefer to interact with the machine because it can always give them what they want, whereas other people, even our children, you know, are frustrated in the way that they don't deliver instant gratification. So I don't know, I feel like that's, I think another interesting feature. I have to say, with your presentation, I feel like the platform stuff is like a vanishing mediator. I'm not sure you need it to like, you know, the world you're describing and the ways that it's similar to the Forster.
I guess what I wanted was just like, to show that you can have very slim technology, right? Like where like in the machine stops you have like these like giant mechanical systems that literally reach everywhere, and here you have these like little slim, you know, digital platforms that yet succeeds in organizing so much of our world, right?
Yeah, I guess that then it's sort of like, you know, there's that bumper sticker like, you don't hate Mondays, you hate capitalism, you know, and I just wonder.
Yeah,
like,
so I didn't mean to say I hate the platform society. I'm just saying that's one image, right, of the present, right? So like when I look at like, how do readers describe our technological stage or system right now, that's a sort of, it wasn't to be pro or con the platform society, it was like that's a sort of description. I could also have gone with like, you know, surveillance capitalism and Jean Suboff or whatever, like whatever description you want to have of the current system. Yeah, so let me try to, this was 4 questions, like let me try to go, from the back. I think the instant gratification thing and the social interaction, I think is so true. I mean, and one of the reasons when you read the story also now I don't call my aunt for recipes that I can't remember. I just, how do you make, I just ask, thanks to the machine, I can now cook anything without socially interacting with anybody, this was clearly the grounding of certain sort of more distal relations, right, that we had these sort of practical purposes together. So I do think that kind of instant gratification versus social relation is very important. This question about sameness and wanting the same thing and thinking that we're so different but we're really the same in the machine, that's actually another really fascinating part of this short story, is that Forster really puts out this idea that nobody needed to travel anywhere because everywhere were the same, right? And all the people were the same, right? And so that sameness is really actually an important part of the story that I didn't have time to talk about so much. And I find it fascinating. So some of my other work is very interested in the personalization, right, of our platform, and how, in a way, not only do we already with franchises and capitalism in general created a world where things are very similar. Now, movement is actually oddly changed, because if you travel with your data preferences, right? So Google says that the goal is, right, to predict what you want before you know you want it. To arrive in Singapore and the drink is already on the bar. That is your favorite drink. It's why did I travel if the world comes with me? What does it mean to move if the world comes with me? So what I actually think we're seeing in personalization is another form of entrapment, where the idea of space becomes, movement becomes irrelevant, because it's the same. So I think the sameness thing is incredibly important, right? What was the first thing you get? Yeah, I think that was sort of connected to your first point. We can talk more after, I think, Lisa. Thank you.
Okay, one more quick question. Yeah.
Thank you. I so appreciated your talk. I am curious. You said 2 things that were really interesting to me. What will the state of mental life and our orientation to the world be? And what will people know about their world? And so as we all anticipate this uncertain future, I think philosophy is underappreciated. I think it's Daniel Dennett that said every field is philosophy until we know what questions to ask. So I appreciate being able to think about this. My question to you is, given this future world that will have technology in it, it absolutely will, we have to grapple with it. What do you think human beings, an individual human mind, needs to be able to do? What skills, what abilities, what information? We no longer live in an information scarcity. We live in an information glut. It's not about access to information. It's about knowing how to critically process information in productive ways. And so I live in I'm in sociology, social psychology, micro, so I am always thinking about all of these big things, so thank all of you. But what do you think the implications are for the individual human mind, for education, for the skills that we need to be able to teach people? We don't need human computers anymore. We don't need horses. We don't, the debate about calculators, and even in statistics, whether people need to know actually what statistics means and is, or you can just plug in a little bit of information is dangerous. So what do human beings need to be able to do? It seems like you think about these questions. Thank you.
I mean, thanks for the confidence. That's a small team question, right? But I do think that these questions, so actually, because, I think our website died, you basically refer to the work that I did before 5 years ago, right? Which also shows, though, that I have recently entered this field of philosophy of technology precisely for the question that you are asking. because I was thinking about the mind and agency, right? And I was thinking about the mind is embodied and embedded, and I was arguing over there in like philosophy of neuroscience about like how our embodiment and world matters, right? With the sort of Cartesian people that think that the mind is just complete, and you can plug it in anywhere, no problem. In a computer, you can plug it in, and like I'm arguing with those guys. Then I'm like, oh my God, look at I'm saying that we depend on our world, and now we're completely changing our world. Right? So my sort of turn to philosophy of technology was because I think that it does change us, and I do think that there are things that we need, right? What are those things? I think that we can use philosophy to begin to speculate about some categories that might matter, but then we also need empirical work, because I do think that we have succeeded in adapting to all sorts of things that speculatively we were like, oh, we can't adapt to that, and then it's like, voila, okay, we adapted to that. Right? So I think that there's sort of intersection of speculating. So on the speculation part, which is my business, right? I have been very interested, and like I was interested in Igor's talk because of the role of space and what role space and movement has played in organizing our mind. So remember, the brain is completely malleable. Like it learns, right? So the structure you have in here depends on the structure out here, okay? So if we make this dynamic, things are gonna go haywire in that, okay? It's just actually very simple, right? But what exactly kinds of stabilities and things do we need in this world? Much more complicated, right? That it will matter, I really don't think is a complicated issue, right? We go crazy if you just put us in solitary confinement. If you put like so actually in the story, it's solitary confinement. She would go be bonkers, right? Like, they say there's a soft light in the room, and I'm imagining almost like in psychology, like there's this notion of a Gauss field. I don't know if you know this, where you basically, if you put like, half ping pong balls over people's eyes, so you just like have this like sort of white space where there's nothing for your eyes to grab onto, you quite quickly begin to hallucinate. Okay? So we know a lot of things from psychology about like the stabilizing role of the world for our mind. Okay? So what do we need, right? So in terms of so I've been like worried about personalization, the fact that we get separated into different worlds, right? That we lose our shared world. Can we handle that? Right?